As far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me. And during the few moments that we have left, we want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me. Us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Today's episode might be a bit different to the kind of previous formal formats because today is just going to be an informal chat with a dear friend of mine, actually. Today, in part, actually, is inspired by what James Baldwin says is intellectual friendships, and that is further reinforced by Nina Simone when she says, she never spoke about men or clothes with her friends. It was literally about Marx, Lenin, and revolution. And I have many friends, but as it goes, many of your friends may not be interested in the things you are interested in. Or you find the opposite. You find people who are interested in what you're interested in, but you don't want to be friends with them. So I'm glad today I'm speaking to someone who has combined both those characteristics for me, and that is a friend, and we just like chopping it up. How are you, Christian?
I'm good, man. That was a very kind intro. To be,
Nah,
I'm glad that you see me in that light. I also see you in that light, bro. So I
Nah,
appreciate
thank
it.
you, man. Thank you, man. It's been for context, for background. Me and Christian, we've been in conversation. I think was it December time?
Yeah, it's been since December. Yeah.
Time has flown though. Almost five
Yeah,
months.
facts, facts,
Almost
facts.
5 months. Speaking like every day.
Yeah, bro, it's crazy.
literally
Internet is
speaking like.
crazy like that. Yeah.
Nah, it really is. It really is. But yeah, we're chopping it up, man. Chopping it up today. So, where's your mind at these days? What you thinking of, bro?
Man, what I'm thinking about, I work, like pretty much 5 days a week. So I think about
Mm-hmm.
work, I think
Mm-hmm.
about friends, I think about family. I'm a recent college graduate, so I guess, I'm trying to, enter this stage in my life in which I'm trying to break away from the kind of, mode that I was in when I was in school, which was just, constant place of stress and trying to sort out things as it comes to working, being an adult, and cultivating, healthy relationships in my life. That's really where my head is at.
Nah, I hear that, man. I hear that, man. And in terms of like, again, I don't want to make this so formal. We can just chat, bro. We can just chat.
Yeah,
What's some
yeah.
of the things you're thinking of in terms of like politics wise? Like, what things are you thinking of recently? I mean, for my kind of context, I don't want to, I don't feel like you said something beautiful the other day. You said that the intellectual journey will be filled up with, or is kind of paved with several disillusionments, and that has been lingering in my mind for quite some time. The reason why it's been lingering in my mind because I find it to be so flipping true. Like, I mean, I can't, people will ask you, oh, what kind of radicalized you? Or what kind of, got you developing a revolutionary politic or whatever it may be. And I can't point to certain things, but all I've known is that for quite some time, I've been interested in, in the idea of race and why and anti-racism work, even though I kind of hate that term now. We can unpack that term.
Yeah,
We can
yeah,
unpack that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
can unpack the why. But anti-racism and anti-blackness and all these things, and obviously that's been a consistent and constant in my life for quite some time. But as you get older and you read more, you develop more your ideas, and the kind of overarching principle or question we're thinking of is where do we locate liberation, for example?
Hmm.
And I think through our conversations, off obviously not on this, but privately, we spoke a lot about developing a Marxist framework or developing anti-capitalist approach. So my question to you is why you know why do you have an anti-capitalist approach, and what led you to that direction when it comes to thinking about issues of race?
For sure. Yeah, man. I think, for me, as a black person, I always had, this kind of desire to approach the question of race and,
Mm-hmm.
coupled with personal experiences, things I'd observe, whether they be firsthand or,
Mm-hmm.
those around me. I was always concerned with the question of race.
Yeah.
However, at some point, when I was kind of entering college and stuff and further in my intellectual journey, I just started getting more into it was actually Cornell West. And it was reading his
Mm.
book, Prophecy Deliverance.
You're in the
And
greatest company.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know we both love him very much.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think he's been very integral to both of our like intellectual journeys. But reading Prophecy Deliverance, in which is a book in which I was also going through some serious kind of religious struggles as a Christian. I
Mm,
think college and coming into adulthood is an era in which you kind of try to make sense of your childhood, the things that you've been
yes.
taught, and try to reconcile those things. So I was going through a deeply like religious journey, and I was
Hmm.
coming to face with questions of injustice. And
Mm,
like I started to get drawn to liberation theology and Black liberation
yes.
theology, and then I stumbled upon Cornel West's Prophecy Deliverance, in which he tries to
Yes.
kind of create a project in which he combines the individuality of the Black prophetic radical Christian tradition along with
Yes.
the great collective project that is Marxism. And so then I
Hmm.
got interested in Marxism, and kind of getting deeper into how these kind of racial inequities and racism is buttressed and inextricably linked to an
Mm.
economic mode of production, and how we must always have that good material analysis
A
when we're talking.
material analysis.
Yeah.
Listen,
Yeah.
Christian, for you, those who don't know, Christian be heavy on the material analysis, and that's definitely infused into me recently, and further reinforced. I mean, we're reading right now currently Black Jacobins, and the first chapter is property. And it kind
Mhm.
of, whilst reading that, I mean, I know we're going to speak more about it, but whilst reading Black Jacobins, I can't help but think of what Dr. CBS said to me, which came first, race or capitalism? And also, indeed, you're saying similar things that, we have to understand capitalism as a system of economics that kind of divides people into labor, and all too often that labor has been divided on racial lines.
Right, right, right.
So again, so carry on, bro. Tell me what else continued your intellectual journey. So you started off prophecy deliverance, great place to start. We both love Cornell West. Funny enough, it's funny. I think it's quite funny that we met in the way that we did, because we both love Cornell West, and Cornell West also is responsible for a lot of our intellectual journey.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. So I was starting to be introduced to this kind of politic, or this kind of analysis that
Hmm.
kind of locates social hierarchies or systems of domination within an economic system of production. And I was also
Hmm.
kind of active in kind of like student activism on campus. But I
Yes.
started to become like, because I started becoming like deeply disillusioned with it, because
Yes.
I felt like it was actually part of kind of a larger like neoliberal project. Yeah, I
Mm.
I went to I went to a fairly prestigious school, so
Go on,
uh,
flex on us.
I mean you can say it if you want to.
He's a Columbia. This nigga went to Columbia. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I went to that school, and I was involved with student activism, but it felt like while there was some good work that was being done, and there was actually some especially with like some of the work around Palestine, there was some serious wins made by the people doing good work
Hmm.
on the campus. I don't want to diminish people doing good work on campus, but I do
Yes.
feel like in places like that, you also have kind of this strain of quote unquote activism, in which what you're actually doing is like trying to include people within, or make sure people have their place within the ruling class. Because let's not
Yes.
be dishonest. These are institutions in which the ruling, this is where the ruling class go to school, and this is
I
where they get,
produced.
yeah, and where they are further produced and reproduced.
Yes.
Right, like if you just think about like the kind of economic background that a lot of these kids come from, keep in mind that like 50% of the kids there don't receive financial aid, and to not receive
Oh
financial
wow.
aid usually requires at a school like that for family income to be over about like 250,000, and
Wow.
250,000 annual income is a fairly, I don't misquote me, I think it's probably like 10%, you know around the 10% percentile, for like family income. So get, kind of understand, the realm that you're in, and the institution that you're in, and the kind of people that
Mm.
are there. And when your activism is kind of fighting to just include yourself and make sure that you get what what you deserve from that particular ruling class
Mm,
institution, and not caring, as much as we should, or about, the surrounding community, and not pushing as hard to, care about the surrounding community.
hmm. In
Then,
that
oh
environment,
yeah,
sorry to interject, and please, I will let you finish, but I also like you to include this in your response as well. In that environment, then, so what led to disillusionment, and why do you think, in your estimation, that it's just in those institutions, which you find a lot of time, and we talk about neoliberalism a lot, but
mhm.
it almost as if people just want to get more of the capitalist pie for themselves,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
people they know immediately. It's
yeah.
not about the collective anymore. So did you see that? Is that what kind of led to disillusionment, or was it more
Well, it
things?
was just like people was putting all this energy into, kind of, pushing for their diversity and inclusion within this particular space. But niggas is
Hmm.
starving, bro. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
For real?
right? Like, Harlem is suffering, or like, many places in New York is suffering. What is how much energy or action is being put towards being of support or leveraging the resources that you have in this
Yes.
surrounding community. So I was disillusioned by that, because I felt like, because I was just looking at the stark difference. I didn't have to. I mean, I was an engineering person, right? Like, I didn't have to be
Yeah.
a sociologist to just kind of observe, the stark differences between how what people would call, subjugated, persons in the university versus, the people that come there to serve us food or to clean our
Mm.
halls. There's a
Yeah.
stark difference between how each of us is living, regardless of the racial or gender
Yeah.
background that we occupy. You sit in this fortress, and some people labor, in this
Yes.
fortress, and go back to the ghetto once the sun sets.
Hmm.
So, there was that disillusionment. So I just kind of like fell away, and then I always talk about, like, my first job out of college was, surprisingly enough, going to these schools. They kind of push everybody to go to finance or consulting. So I was a
Yeah.
materials engineering major, and sometimes the job market is actually pretty tough to
Yes.
work in your actual like engineering field,
Hmm.
if you're going to the school, because they're prioritizing pushing you into other things. So
Hmm.
I ended up working in like this kind of facility in which we would test metals for the airplane industry, and it was a blue collar job. It's not something you expect, someone going to after they graduate from an Ivy League school.
Yeah.
And I was amongst, my coworkers at this blue collar job, and you could see very clearly, some of the phenomena that are often described. Like,
Mm.
you see the tension between the workers and management. You see the
Wow.
pressures by things like just in time production. You see the cutting of benefits, the cut of profit sharing, the deterioration of working class power, the lack of unions, the lack of ability to politically organize,
Mm.
just in that workplace. So it was that furthered my, and I'm in there, and like, you hear, what your coworkers are talking about and speaking of, and how this stuff like affects their real lives.
Yes.
They're talking about, like, how they're gonna, feed their family, provide healthcare for their family. So I always, I feel like, my journey has always been rounded out by both, things that I've read and then personal experiences.
No, I hear that, man. I hear that, man. So then it's interesting because I mean, I think a lot of people come to like a revolutionary politic by way. I mean, in so many ways. Some people it kind of hits them in the face that they've been exploited. Some people just read something and they radicalize. Some people through conversation with others, and some people through like literally falling in love with revolutionary figures.
Hmm.
But we often say, don't we, speak about like how we have to kind of that might be people's starting point, but then we've seen in real time what happens when you make trauma your politics, isn't it? Or when you
Yeah,
center
yeah,
you as an individual in your
right.
politics, because you no longer, it's all about, again, it delivers the results which you mentioned. Like it just delivers the results of, okay, I just want better for myself and people, those in my immediate circle,
Hmm. Hmm.
rather than seeing yourself as a part of a collective. So
Right.
I find that quite interesting, quite interesting. So, what are some of the things you're like working on now, thinking with now, then, in terms of like politics, and how's your thinking developed since then? Are you still reading Marxist stuff, or?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm continuing to, read, Marxist stuff. I think, as I stated before, I've had, particular, like, I had a kind of a religious struggle, so I was also kind of rooted in reading, things that entertain my religious curiosities. And our good friend Amadou, has been
Yeah.
helpful in that. Even though he practices Islam, like it's been a great way for me to look into other like kind of religious traditions. So he's put me on to Meister Eckhart, which is
Yeah.
kind of a more of a mystical approach to Christianity that it may be more in line, like Sufi
Mm,
mysticism. So
yes.
and it's interesting because it just goes to show how like complex things can be in terms of that we want to like draw kind of all these demarcations, but the links between various ideologies, schools of thought,
Yeah.
can those links can be drawn in many places, and traditions can be much closer than you would presume. So and with that in mind, even speaking or thinking about like political or economic things that I've looked into, and which I've probably been like most heavy on as of late. It just I just continue to approach things with a certain sobriety, and
Yes.
with a certain not like a lack of expectation, but just a willingness to understand that at any time, things are just going to get more complex. There's
Hmm.
always going to be more variables to consider. There's always going to be more things to understand. And there is no, kind of just, there's no one tool
hundred
to,
percent.
to
And we've
dissect
said
through.
that a lot. We've said
Right.
that a lot. We've said that in the quest for liberation. Yes, we have a material analysis, which I still firmly am committed to in the sense that it delivers real relief in real time very quickly. But I don't believe that liberation will be found solely in the political. I think there's so much work that needs to be done. Again, I think, and there's so much things that need to be done. So in kind of like, okay, so yeah, what kind of books would you recommend for our listeners then, if they want to develop a like revolutionary politic? What helped you?
Well, I would say I really enjoy. I'll just say what we're currently reading because I feel like those are great. Like
Yeah.
we're currently reading. We currently just finished The State and Revolution by Vladimir Lenin. The book is
Yeah.
hilarious. That
Listen,
guy is funny, bro. That guy is funny. That guy is
damn
funny.
well, Lennon is on Twitter today. He'll
Yeah,
be
facts.
dragging niggas in the TL.
Yeah, facts. State and Revolution, Black Jacobins by CLR James. That's a great
Yeah.
one. Women,
Oh,
Race, and Class by Angela Davis. I really enjoyed that book. What else? What else?
what reasons did you really enjoy a woman racing class?
Well, I really enjoy, how she kind of, back to the point earlier, right? That,
Mhm.
that you have a economic system that requires inequity, and when you require inequity, you must divide labor amongst the population, and
Mhm.
gender and race can be used to kind of characterize particular individuals to carry out particular tasks
You
or
see when I said this nigga spitting? You see when I said
so
this nigga spitting? This is what I get. This is what this is the education I'm getting, guys.
so for the slave, right, for the black woman on the plantation, her womanhood cannot be understood as like white womanhood, right? Because she had to fulfill
Hmm.
particular labor tasks. She had to work in the fields,
Yep.
as well as the house.
Yep.
So her, she was not afforded, but she was not given you know
Yeah.
a characterization of fragility,
Hmm.
characterizes someone to be protected in the way that the Victorian or the white bourgeois woman was at the time. So you see very and Angela Davis is a Marxist, so
Yeah.
she's heavy on that, so yeah, I think it's a great example of kind of the things that we've been talking about, and it's a very
Hundred
it's a
percent.
very easy read, it's a very instructive read.
Yes.
Highly recommend.
Yes.
I also like to read some like interesting, like papers and stuff. So I read, I think I can't remember the exact title, but it was a paper on W.E.B. Du Bois's visit to Maoist China and how he was developing
Mm.
a relationship at the time with Maoist China, and how that was actually integral to some of the wins for civil rights and for Black Americans in
Wow.
the U.S. Right, like using kind of international solidarity to push for wins within our context. So it's important again, in this day and age where a lot of people like to be anti-solidaristic. It's important to not forget how certain kind of solidarity can be made across,
100%.
you know, national lines and stuff like that.
100%. I mean, we often speak about, I mean, this is not to obviously never, ever, would ever say Martin Luther King's Jr.'s legacy has been diminished. But you often say that maybe, I don't want to speak for you and I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, but is it fair to say you don't think he gets enough props in certain topics?
Right, right. I don't think he gets enough props for his like intellectual depth. His real scholarship. The man is
Mm-hmm.
a bona fide scholar. If you read, I remember reading, this other, kind of paper he had written. I think when he was in seminary about, Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a famous, Christian theologian, and he's
Mm-hmm.
talking about the dialectical relationship between eternity and history, the ideal and
Mm,
reality, and how that shapes his politics, and how one may always push towards an ideal in their struggle for liberation, but it may not be realized, which is very similar to some of the concepts that
mm,
Cornell West talks about in prophecy deliverance, right? That
yes.
there's human nature could be understood as one's proclivity to change things or one's depravity to remain unchanged, and those who have
Wow.
a proclivity towards transformation understand that transformation, that the ideal may never be reached, but we push forward anyway. That is the story of the tragic, as opposed to the story of the pathetic, which is one who seeks to not change things. He
Yeah, I mean
seeks
that's in line for me with like the Islamic understanding of why we do what we do. Obviously, we want to achieve what we want. That's what we do. We want to achieve things, but at the same time, we are not like goal oriented in the same way. We are principle oriented. No, we are goal oriented, but I want to say we're not primarily goal oriented. First and
Mhm.
foremost, we do what we do because it's the right thing to do.
On the
That's
principle.
isn't yeah on the principle. So we're principle
Yes,
oriented first and
facts.
foremost, and then we from through because we have principle stances that leads us to have the goals that we have in anyway,
Right, 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 right.
and then we want to achieve those goals by being principle. We hope that we can achieve those goals.
Hmm.
But I know for real, for real, for real. And what else is like you're thinking of recently, man? What else are you thinking of? What else are you trying to work on?
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
not not personally though. I just mean like in general.
Oh, okay, okay.
And
We can talk
no,
about
no.
personally too.
You're about to say, oh, you want to.
No, 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 no. Chill, chill, chill. But I mean, I feel like this is like personal, but it's I can leave it abstract enough, so I'm not diving into my personal life. But
Yeah.
I think one of the things I've been thinking about is trying to figure out how to appreciate people in my life properly.
Mm,
And as much as I like to talk about politics and stuff, and
yeah.
especially when politics are so centered around these principles of whether they be egalitarianism or radical compassion, with which is in kind of revolutionary Christian tradition. It's important to also just figure out how to be a good person. These
Yes.
things are not divorced, but
Speak on it.
and that is further reason to kind of think about these things. So I guess I've been thinking about all the love that has been put into me by various people, including yourself, Mamadou, and figuring out
Hey.
how to best appreciate those people, how to best lift those people up, and understand and let them know how much they mean to me in my life, and
Mm.
exploring different avenues.
No, and I think you raise a very important point, and I call myself an aspiring abolitionist, and because I do want to kind of remove. Someone said the other day, kill the cop in your head, and I think by
Mhm,
extension, kill the notions of carcerality in your head as well. It's very
mhm.
important. It's difficult. We speak about transformative and restorative justice, but sometimes we're like, I just want to. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes niggas just want to need to get shot. That's the problem sometimes. So you exist in that weird kind of paradigm, or a weird kind of like, oh, where do I want to be? But again, I'm aspiring to be better. I'm aspiring to be on the side where I can, have much more mercy. Because I do believe in the principles of like mercy, and I think justice is rooted in love and mercy. It sounds very
Mhm.
abstract, but I do believe that's what justice should be rooted in anyway. And again, how can you be a beacon of the politics? You're saying that you want to build a healthier world, you want to be healthier communities, but you don't exhibit those principles in your own personal life.
Right, right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
and
I feel
I think it's important for the for the personal reason. And I say that
Yes.
just because, like, I don't want to over kind of play, the personal in the political as well. Because sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
wrestle with this question, right?
Yeah.
Because what you don't want to get into is kind of a self righteousness or
Yes.
a lifestyle politic, right? Because we
Yes.
commodify lifestyles.
Yes.
Lifestyles are something that are sold to us, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't want our kind of personal actions or also our personal consumer choices to be the ways in which we're the only ways in which we're expressing the political, because the political is collective, right? The political is institutional, the political is organizational. So if it's not
Mm-hmm.
about, if it does, it has to lead back to that, and it has to lead back to engaging a real struggle of power with various leveraging certain forces against others, to
Mm-hmm.
create real change, real political change in people's lives. It's very easy in an era of neoliberalism, and I'm not throwing that word out there, just as a buzzword, but like
Yes.
neoliberalism as an era in which we identify or we locate sovereignty of the individual and one as a consumer. It's very
Yes.
important not to make sure that you're engaging in a consumer politic and in an
Yes.
individual politic, and then because then you're just playing into the larger paradigm of the day, and
Yes.
that's then that defeats
The whole
then
purpose.
yeah, that defeats your whole purpose. It's yeah.
I mean, you mentioned something before, and I wouldn't even attempt to say it as eloquently as you did when you spoke about the how, we buy into brands, or how we become known by our brands, or we become known by what we own. I know and you spoke about a very specific type of economic model. I don't know if you remember that conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So there's this chapter, and this is often talked about. This is often talked about by other. I've heard it talked about with other scholars as well. But the
Mm-hmm.
chapter that I remember, kind of most vividly talking about this is a chapter in this book. It's called "When Will Capitalism End?" I think it was written in
Mm-hmm.
2016 by Wolfgang Street. And there's a chapter in
Mm-hmm.
there called "The Consumer Society," and so he talks about the consumer society. Well, one could say the consumer society actually arises and out of like kind of like New Deal era, blah blah blah. But like
Mm-hmm.
what you have is that you had an era of Fordist production in which you had like mass produced goods. Everything is mass produced. They're kind of uniform and they're distributed amongst the population, especially within the kind of Western world. But you reached a point in which we were trying to like diversify production. So it wasn't so much as producing these kind of mass produced uniform goods. Now you can make small changes within production to diversify production. So you can create individual products to various people's liking in a society where where you have an emphasis on the consumer. You want to up consumer satisfaction. You can provide these kind of diversified commodities to increase consumer satisfaction. So when you have
Mm-hmm.
these diversified products that you can now imbue values, beliefs, ideals,
Yep.
even politics into these kind of
Yep.
different commodities, then one consumes not just for the sake of feeding themselves or for putting a roof over their head, furnishing their
Mm-hmm.
home, not just kind of utility, but also for a certain value for one's identity. Now you can
Mm.
kind of create identity within the things that you consume, and this is you could say that oh yeah, you're sure you identify with a commodity or an item all throughout history, but this is a particular time and space in which you're offered a plethora of options. You're
Yes.
offered a plethora of options, and you see a rise of kind of like these consumer subgroups forming and people forming
Mm-hmm.
community around consumption. Like
Yes.
this is that, and how it's tied to a particular mode of production is as it's described there is unprecedented. And there's further analysis by other people I've seen talk about how this can be extended to the death of engaging in the political and one
Mm-hmm.
trying to represent their beliefs and values through through consumption as opposed to engaging the political. And you this is also contextualized in the Western world with the decline of, especially in the U.S. with the decline of like labor unions, the decline of collective institutions.
Mm.
So when you're deprived of collective institutions and you're offered these kind of consumer subgroups through which you can, individually, you can make these consumer decisions as an individual, what then do you
No,
have? And what's
no,
further wrong about this is that, these are also frictionless communities, right? If I
mm,
have an obligation to, say my family, and there's a bunch of exceptions to this. I'm not gonna act like there aren't,
yeah,
kind of unhealthy, toxic, family dynamics or whatever. But
yes,
just say that you have an obligation to your grandfather to care for him, to
yes,
go see him, make sure he's okay, this, that, and third. You can't let that go because he's your grand, right?
yes,
Because you owe something. You have a duty to him.
yes,
If you're built a community around a consumer subgroup, like all your friends are there, into fashion, so like they're
yeah,
they're Nike, they're Nike sneaker people, right? They're in this
hmm
Nike sneaker. If you don't like Nike sneakers anymore, you can just leave. You know what I mean? Like
yes,
you just make a different consumption choice.
yeah,
Maybe you like Adidas now. Now your ties to that community is severed, and your exit from that community is fairly frictionless. There's no deep,
mm,
commitment in the way that there is in other forms of community, say like a family or maybe even
mm,
religious. But again, I don't want to. I'm not. There's a fine line to walk here because we also understand that sometimes those obligations and those duties can be
yes,
overstated, and
of course.
and can introduce abusive dynamics as well. So I don't want to discount that.
No, no, 100%. I think it's very interesting about when you said that because immediately I thought of how, by your consumer habits, you want an inference to be made about you, and people are going to make the inference about you anyway. So it's
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
I own this case,
Right.
therefore clearly I'm a social justice warrior, or
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
own
Hmm.
this, therefore I must. And I think it's a cop out, personally,
Right.
a
Right.
lot of
Right.
the time.
Right. Right. So
Apart from a
so
lot, it's like that nigga DeRay. What's his name? DeRay. Invest.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. No, no, I mean, like, the part about that gets further about this is also, the focus, not necessarily on concrete action and collective, organization, but self-presentation, right? Like, the politics is then about, self-presentation. How do you choose to present yourself? Because, you know, fashion is great again for thinking about this, right? You go into deep intellectual deliberation about how one must present themselves. You stand in the mirror
Hmm.
for a long time, and this is not just and you try to synthesize your personality within
Wow.
particular external symbols, whether they be through your clothes, through the objects that you own, through the things that you post. So that's where your intellectual energy is going, right? That's where your all your effort is going into. It's about how
Mm-hmm.
how will I present myself to these people, instead of how will I organize with these people to kind of gain some sort of political win, or whatever, put food on the table, uh, healthcare, whatever issues you're concerned about. But how do I
For
show
real.
people that I care about the issues? Yeah.
Again, it's like it's just a cop out. Like for a lot of the time,
Yeah.
because it removes. Again, it's like Deidre was saying on a previous episode that it's easy for a corporation to throw 20,000 anti-racist training.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's easy for a corporation to put on Black Lives Matter and post a black square or run a competition for black creatives. What's really the issue is when they stop mining cobalt in the Congo where people are dying for them to for you so that people can have iPhones. That's what is,
Mhm.
what I mean. And I keep telling people that's why I try and tell people, we have to adopt an internationalist thinking in our politics. Because
Yeah.
again, if you say Black Lives Matter, do you mean just Black Lives Matter only in America? Do
Mhm.
Black Lives
Mhm.
Matter only
Mhm.
in the UK? Is that what you're
Right.
saying, or do you mean Black Lives
Right.
Matter globally? And if you're saying, which obviously I believe that Black Lives Matter globally, then of course then we have to adopt an internationalist thinking because the technologies and systems of oppression that allow, I don't want to, America's crazy, and so is the UK in terms of racism. But again, no one's going to stand here and say that us as black people in America, and this is not to play oppression Olympics, but no one would say that us black people in America and UK, given what we have, is more oppressed than those living in the global south.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the
Yeah.
luxuries that we, and the little luxuries that we do enjoy, comes with the exploiting of people who could be our literal cousins in the global south.
Right. Right.
So again, I just keep telling people, we have to keep trying to adopt that lens and connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm,
But I
mm-hmm.
mean, bro, we can go on forever, man. But
Yeah.
I like to keep my about this length anyway. This has been a
Yeah.
dope
Facts. Facts.
conversation.
Facts.
I'm gonna put Christian's socials in the comments. He may not reply to you, but
I'll try, man. I just get really anxious with messaging and stuff. But like
Nah, I
if you
feel you,
reach
man.
out, in good faith, if you have a question, if you want me to shoot you a link, or if you have something that maybe I said something in here that's again, and I think this is what I also love about Momadou. I think both of us, try to engage in good faith and understand
Mhm.
at any moment, we try our hardest to learn things, but at any moment we could be wrong, like. So if I said something on here that's false and you want to point it out to me, then go ahead, hit my DM. I'm always trying to learn. And again, in the spirit of appreciating friends, I just want to say, I was actually fairly nervous about coming on here, but Momadou has a way of making people feel very comfortable, and I appreciate that.
Nah,
I
thank you.
appreciate that from him very much, and I appreciate again, him as someone who engages intellectually. He always engages in good faith, and he always engages and puts forth his best effort. So that is something I truly admire in
Nah, thank
Momadou.
you,
And
bro.
for all your listeners, man, like you're tuning in to listen to a good guy speak, man.
Thank you
So
so
yeah,
much, man. Thank you so much, my bro. You know it's nothing but love, man.
yeah,
This
facts,
is the
facts.
Malcolm Effect with Mamadou. Please like, comment, subscribe. Be there on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, people speak. Take care and speak soon.